There's no such thing as a substitute or an alternative to an iconic watch. Recently, I was watching a video on YouTube and someone who I know, someone who I respect, and that I've talked to many times about watches in general, made a video where he was talking about alternatives to the Cartier tank and the Cartier Santos. However, when I was watching that video, I kind of started to disagree with him. And of course, that's normal. You don't have to agree with everybody and everything that you hear. As I started thinking about it, why is it that I feel that all of the watches that he mentioned are not actual alternatives or substitutes for a Cartier? In the video, he went on about how Cartier are overpriced, which I'm not going to disagree with. He said that their quality is okay. I'm not sure I agree with that. He says that they are under-designed. I definitely don't agree with that, and that they lose a ton of value on the secondary market. Although I agree with some of his points, the secondary market I don't totally agree with. Most Cartier actually hold their value pretty well. So if you were to buy a Cartier new, you would be able to sell it for close to what you paid for it used. And in most cases, if you bought a Cartier used, you would be able to sell it for what you purchased it for. You might lose a little bit of money if there's fees involved, but you're not going to lose your shirt. Normally, and in the past, I would have pointed to the vintage market when it comes to Cartier as an alternative to modern Cartier. However, there has been an uptick in vintage models. Lots of the models that used to cost in that $500 to $1,000 range, and I'm talking about those old tanks that were vermil, those are now going for around $1,500 to $2,000. And that's because the general demand for watches have gone up, and Cartier have seen a really big surge in demand. If you love the watches that I talk about here on my channel, you're really going to love the website that I'm about to tell you about. It's called Wristrebels. Wristrebels is a website that has all of those small micro brands and independent brands that are really hard to find, all in one place. Brands like Sika Design, Mon, Formex, Awake, and Beau Blue, and many other brands you won't find anywhere else. Definitely check out Wristrebels at wristrebels.com. Also check out their Instagram at Wristrebels, and if you end up buying something, tell them that WatchChris sent you. But enough about the Cartier tank, because technically this video isn't about Cartier, it's really about substitutes, affordable alternatives to popular watches like Cartier. It doesn't matter what it is, there are tons of alternative videos out there. And the subject isn't limited to watches. This is something very popular in a lot of other industries, fashion in particular, cars, food. It doesn't really matter. I remember when I was a kid, there was a restaurant that was in my neighborhood growing up in Queens that was a sort of substitute of Taco Bell. Essentially copied the menu of Taco Bell. It wasn't Taco Bell. They were trying to be an alternative to Taco Bell, something that was actually cheaper than Taco Bell, if you could imagine. And this was on Jamaica Avenue where I grew up. But I did go there because I was a little kid, I didn't have a lot of money, and I wanted to get tacos. But did the alternative actually satisfy my hunger for Taco Bell? No, my hunger has never been quenched of Taco Bell. Point of this is not about Taco Bell, it's the fact that there are tons of alternatives out there. Almost anything you could think of, there's an affordable alternative hiding around the corner. And the question I'm asking in this video, and I've come to the conclusion on my journey through making this video, but tell me what you guys think down in the comments below. Listen to the rest of what I have to say and make your decision. Is there an actual substitute for something that is iconic or very, very popular? Is there a such thing as a real affordable alternative? Porsche, there is no substitute. Coca-Cola, the only authentic choice. Nerf, or nothing. These phrases are designed to convey that a product is unrivaled. They often aim to create a feeling of exclusivity. And like I was saying earlier, and I love to make confessions about myself on these videos for some reason, every Sunday video, I find myself making some sort of confession. I've made these videos. I like making these videos where I talk about affordable alternatives to iconic watches. Am I part of the problem? Maybe. But these are fun videos to talk about because in some cases, I think there are actual alternatives, and I'll talk about that towards the end of the video. But what I'm realizing through this video and through my own experiences is that alternatives don't really exist, and I'll explain. If you can't afford this, buy this instead. In many cases, the alternative being presented as a substitute is a wonderful watch. It's a wonderful product. It doesn't matter what it is. It's usually pretty good when you compare it to the original. When we're talking about watches, it's usually considered an alternative if it looks similar to the original, if it has a high quality, a good build that is comparable to the original, and most importantly, it has to offer most of the specs of the original at a fraction of the cost. It sounds great on paper. If you really want a Cartier tank, take a look at a Seiko tank. They look very similar. Obviously, their quality is a little bit different, but for the price, the quality on the Seiko is really good. Their shape and style are extremely close. Citizen just recently came out with a tank that looks almost like a one-for-one of a Cartier tank, and those are around $400 from across the room. A quick glance. A guy driving by in a bus at 30 miles per hour might stick his head out the window and say, "Hey, nice Cartier, guy." But is that what you really want? Do you really want people to come over to you and say, "Hey, is that a Cartier? Hey, is that a Rolex? That looks like a Speedmaster." I can honestly speak from experience. I've owned watches that were dubbed the affordable alternatives to more expensive watches. Especially when I couldn't afford those more expensive watches, these watches seemed very, very attractive. And in some cases, I will say they worked. They scratched the itch, and then I walked away from them and said, maybe this watch isn't for me. Specifically the Speedmaster. I've always loved the Speedmaster. I've never bought one. I've had watches that look very similar to it. In fact, one that a lot of people point out as a very good alternative to the Speedmaster, something that I have pointed out, is the Bulova Lunar Pilot. I bought that watch. I wore it for a long time. The one that was in 42 millimeters. I had the 45 millimeter, and I ended up selling it. Not because it wasn't a Speedmaster, just because it wasn't for me. It did scratch the itch, and after that, I was kind of over it. So I ended up selling that watch, the Lunar Pilot, and I never bought a Speedmaster. No matter what you do, if you're wearing one of these watches, someone someday is going to walk over to you and say, "Hey, nice Rolex. I really like your Royal Oak. That's a really cool Cartier tank." And I have to say, the worst feeling, and it's happened to me, is when someone comes over to you and says, "Hey, that's a nice Speedmaster," and it's not a Speedmaster, and they have a Speedmaster on their wrist. I'm just human. I'm just telling you how I feel. I know some people will disagree with me. Some people will say that I'm being a snob or whatever it is. I'm just telling you how I feel, and it's happened to me in the past where someone walks over, they have the Speedmaster that I might have wanted at one point during collecting, and I had something on that was something that looked like a Speedmaster but wasn't, and they walk over and they say, "Hey, nice Speedmaster," and they're like, "Oh, it's not a Speedmaster." And then you have to sit there and explain, "Oh, this is not a Speedmaster, but it's so similar to the Speedmaster because it was also a watch that went to the moon, but it's not the moon watch because it's made by Bulova and it was never officially blah blah blah," and all of that. I really love it, but it's not an Omega. And that was kind of a turning point for me. I asked myself, why can't I afford one of these watches? Why can't I afford a Speedmaster? And like I said, it was a turning point for me in my collection. I stopped buying watches that were alternatives. I didn't buy them if I couldn't afford them. I didn't buy the alternatives and I didn't buy the originals. And I use the word originals. When I use that word originals, it makes me feel a certain way. You want the original. You don't want something that's the alternative. You want the popular model. You want the one that's iconic. And that's kind of how I feel about my watch collection now. If I can't afford it, I don't buy it. I don't buy an alternative to try and scratch the itch. Although it might work for some, it doesn't work for me. And if it works for you, that's awesome. And you should keep on doing what you're doing. This is just something I'm personally not doing anymore. However, there is one caveat to that. This is kind of the basis of how I collect. I make a lot of videos where I talk about alternatives, but I try and choose alternatives that aren't cheap alternatives, that aren't the Seiko tank. The Seiko tank is a not so great watch, I have to be honest. It looks like a Cartier, but it's not the same quality. And that was one of the first watches that this person mentioned in their video. I don't agree with that. If you want a Cartier, that Seiko tank is definitely not gonna scratch that itch. That's the reason why I make videos like I've made in the past, where I talk about really high-end watches, luxury watches that sell for great prices on the secondary market. And there are plenty of watches that you can buy that could sort of replace these iconic watches from really iconic brands as well. A really good example of it is in a video that I just recently did here on my channel, where I was talking about Crador tanks. If you go on eBay right now, there are plenty of Crador tanks for sale. Some of them have actual gold, so there's solid 22 karat gold in these tanks on bracelets, and they look phenomenal. So if you want a Cartier tank but you can't afford it, Crador to me is on par with Cartier. In my opinion, I think Cartier and Crador are somewhat on par with each other. Yes, they make completely differently styled watches, but as I would say, brand recognition, obviously Cartier is higher, but brand quality and collectability, I think Crador is pretty up there. Very high quality watches, especially if you're into Japanese watches. These watches look good and they are reminiscent of a Cartier tank, but they are their own style. These are not Cartier tanks. They look a little bit like a Cartier tank, but they definitely are not. And to me, that's an actual alternative, something that is equal in quality, not almost as good, equal in quality, and some cases even better in quality than a Cartier tank at a far significantly less price. We're talking about $300 to $500 depending on the version that you're getting. Another great brand that I would mention is Dunhill. I've made videos about Dunhill as well. They're actually made in the same family, maybe sometimes in the same factory. Dunhill is owned by the Richemont Group, so is Cartier. These are watches that are coming from the same group. Dunhill make very high quality products in general, and some of their tanks that are on eBay are very, very good. They've used JLC movements in their watches. These are not cheap watches. They are high-end watches that came from some really great watchmakers. However, they aren't very popular. They have a great name. They're not very popular. If you like a really classy tank with some British style, check out Dunhill. Not on par brand-wise with Cartier, but style-wise and quality-wise, these are right up there with Cartier. And again, you can get these for literally nothing on the secondary market. Very cool watches that you should check out. The whole point of me mentioning Cartier and Crador in this video is that there are technically alternatives to these iconic watches, but the point is you don't need something that looks exactly the same. You need something that is on par, that maybe will scratch the itch for real. So if you have a really beautiful Crador tank on your wrist that has all the style and beauty of a Cartier, but it has its own Japanese flair. It's something really high-end, very good looking, and it has maybe even some gold in it, and you only paid like $300 or $400. To me, that's an actual alternative or substitute to the Cartier, because you are getting a very high quality watch that is on par with Cartier. Tell me what you guys think down in the comments below. I think that I've come to the conclusion in this video that yes, alternatives are hard to come by, but you have to really search for real alternatives. A micro brand tank is not going to replace or scratch the itch for a Cartier. A Seiko tank is not going to scratch that itch. But if you can go out and get something that would have cost thousands and thousands of dollars, as much or maybe even more than the Cartier, for the same price as one of those other watches, one of those micro brands or Seikos or Citizens, then that to me is a real substitute. Maybe not an alternative, let's call it a substitute. Tell me what you guys think down in the comments below. Am I wrong? Am I thinking about this wrong? I am always open to discussion and conversation. I love to have these discussions and conversations in the comments. So please tell me down in the description if you think I'm right, if you think I'm wrong. I want to hear from you. Let's keep it civil down there. I don't like to argue, so I would like to have a conversation with you. So let's have a conversation. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching this video. Thank you for logging on today. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell icon. It's super helpful for the channel, and I very much appreciate it. Anyway, guys, thank you for logging on. I'll catch you guys in the next video.